Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casting Views, the podcast which tries to be informative, but we're always entertaining, I hope. This week, I'm on my own in terms of hosting. However, I'm not alone because I've got good friend of the show back, Antonio from numerous podcasts. Let's say that. Say hi, Antonio.
Hello, Dan. Thank you for having me on Casting Views.
How's it going?
I'm great, man. I have like a 4-day weekend. I've been knocking out a bunch of episodes, getting them banked for a busy April. And could you believe it? I actually had time to jump on your show. So this just really kind of makes my day, makes my weekend.
No, thank you for jumping in short notice because I'm gonna keep saying it every time you're on, but I like to refer to you as the busiest man in podcasting because you still got your three podcasts. So how are each of those going at the moment?
Everything's great, and in a way, I kind of have a fourth one, maybe even a fifth one. We talked about that a little bit last time, just like I might have a fifth show coming up, but a fourth show that's kind of developed is I've started doing local cinema features on the Cultworthy Cinema podcast called Salt City Cinema. I'm like 4 episodes in, and it's just me talking to local filmmakers, cinema enthusiasts, production people to kind of expose the growth of the movie and cinema production underground of Salt Lake City, where it used to be a big thing in the 90s where big studios would come out and they'd make movies in Utah because there were all these tax incentives. So there's a lot of talent here. And then in like the 2000s, it kind of dried up. And now it's coming back more on the indie scene. And I'm really excited about that. So I've kind of started a new series, essentially kind of a new podcast focusing on just that. So yeah, I'm pretty busy, you could say.
And the mill for me is literally taking off, isn't it?
The MILF in Me is about 4 months old, almost 5, and it's almost caught up in listens to the 2 shows I've had for almost 2 years now. So it's definitely a hot commodity for me right now.
And some of your recent episodes have been really good. I think I just got through listening. It was the first dates, which was a really good episode, and then your current one at time of recording anyway was the one where your friend Mike came on.
Yeah.
Yep, everyone, if you're not listening to the Cult Worthy or Milf and Me, check them out because they really are worthy of your time, to use a pun there. And
Nice.
and before we go on, I want to tell everyone listening, you and I had the opportunity to meet up recently, didn't we?
We did. You are the first person in our little podcast network that I got to meet in person, which is exciting because you're the one that lives the furthest away from anyone else. So that was a great time. We went to Las Vegas and had a blast. Even though it was only a day and a half, it was still a blast.
So I went on I think it was a 5-day trip to Las Vegas, let our little group of pods know. And Antonio, you're in Salt Lake, aren't you, Utah?
Mhm.
Said, "I'll fly down and meet you," which I just thought was amazing. Now, what you didn't know at the time, and I didn't tell you right till the end because it had been a secret from everyone, so I had to make sure I let certain people back home know first. But yeah, went to Vegas to get married, and so I did that. So after 22 years, I made what did I say? An honest woman out of my wife, and she made an honest man out of me finally. But yeah, it was really cool. So I got to meet you. We went to a comedy club, didn't we? We had a bit of fun. You kind of got me on the drinks. So I hadn't had a drink that whole trip
Yeah,
that
well,
night.
when in Vegas, Dan, we walked the strip, we got a drink at every place we went to, and we
Yeah.
even had a chance to go to a record store the next day, and that was a lot of fun too.
Actually, that story is amazing. Do you want to give a shout out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. If you're ever in Vegas, visit my friend David Rosen. He's the host of the Piecing It Together podcast. He and his dad have a record shop out there called Wax Tracks. And it's just a cool old school record store in like an old converted house that probably has more albums per square foot than I've ever seen in any record store I've ever been in. Great collection.
Seriously, I actually said if I was ever, I don't think I'm going back to Vegas, but if I ever do, I'm going with an empty case and a week, and I'm just going to spend my week in that store. There, like you said, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, and the memorabilia as well. That's
Oh, yeah,
there's all sorts.
memorabilia.
Yeah,
We could have spent a week in there easy.
brilliant, brilliant. But we're not here to talk about movies. We're not here to talk about music. Well, possibly we are actually. But before we get into what we're going to talk about, let's hear from some friends of both of ours. Let's hear from Super Familiar with the Wilsons.
The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. You know that family whose house you hung out in when you were a kid? The house was a little loud and chaotic, but always fun. and sometimes felt more home than home. Well, that's us.
We're the Wilsons, and we welcome you into our podcast with silly chat, ridiculous games, and interviews with interesting people.
Like a spin doctor. The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast.
Welcome home.
And we're back. So, Antonio, we are going to hold a dinner party, and I've given you the chance to invite three celebrities or three famous people. I think I did say living or dead. I think I said to you. So I want you and I to discuss what our perfect dinner party is going to be. The guests will bring. I think I've thrown you a curveball by saying what we're going to serve them, what meal we're going to cook up. And if and for me, I mean, it's up to you. Again, I threw this to you last minute just before we recorded. If there's a soundtrack or particular music you're going to play to them, and like I said, mine, there's a particular reason why I've thrown that one in when go into it. So, how do you want to do this? Should we do a guest each? We alternate, and then we'll
Ye
work out. We'll find out what our total party is going to be.
Yeah, and before we do that, like, I was trying to think of how I was going to split this up because, you know me, I'm a movie guy, I'm a host of a movie podcast. It is pretty instinctual that I would bring 3 movie celebrities or film celebrities, and so the way that I did it to kinda not sound monotonous is I picked a personality that I really admired that is in the industry that I currently am in. That might even be, like, the catalyst of why I chose that industry, and, of course, a movie person. And then I wanted to pick either an author slash writer or a musician. And here's the thing, as much as I am a music appreciator, I'm not very well educated in the method or the history of music or musicians, except for like maybe 2 or 3 bands that I'm really passionate about. But I am really well versed in a lot of writings and authors and books and stuff. So I chose that direction for my third rather than music. How did you decide?
That's interesting as well because yeah, we didn't discuss this before, so I didn't put any limits other than just three people. So yeah, I wanted from three different areas, distinct areas. So kind of chosen mainly the three areas I'm most interested in. So one is from the music world, one is from the food world, and one is from the acting world as well. So it'll be interesting because you said about the industry you're currently in. So it'll be interesting to see who you've got there. And again, on top of that, though, I wanted to make sure I had people that I could literally grill through the night. Someone, people who've got stories, people who have got some fun things that we could talk about. I'd be interested in their history, let alone just the fact that they've potentially reached the top of their game or are hugely successful in their game. I'd want to sit back, let them have a couple of glasses of wine and see what comes out.
And see, that's interesting. I picked a different approach where I wanted to talk to people that I didn't really want to grill or ask questions. I wanted to talk to people whose works, whether they're literary or cinematic, that I'm so familiar with and so familiar with like their origins and the things that push them in that direction that we could literally just have a conversation about those worlds and those projects that inspired them to be what they were without me having to ask, how did you get started? Where did you first want to be a writer? That kind of stuff. Because I do that all the time on podcasts. I talk and ask people questions. And if I'm going to have a dinner with someone, I'm not saying that there's a wrong way to do this. I would love to just like get in a conversation that like maybe would lead to like a subject, whether it was a book or a movie or a piece of writing in a newspaper. And then we could just talk. That's how I kind of approached it.
Okay, so do you want to go first or shall I go first?
I mean, I'll go first.
Let's alternate. We'll do one each so we kind of build up our parties as we go along. So yeah, hit me with your first one.
I mean, I also didn't have any backups other than these 3, so if we do have crossover, maybe we can just both talk about it and be a 3-person dinner.
It'd be
Um,
interesting if we did. It'll be interesting if we did.
so for mine, I am a culinarian by trade. I originally went to production school and began like my college career in media, digital video production and communication with the intent of going to film school. But I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that they would try to teach you to not be creative. They wanted to teach you the process first and you'd apply your creativity later. So instead, I explored my second passion as a career, which was the culinary world. I am a chef by trade. Right now, I'm a culinary director for a high end supermarket that I enjoy that job very much. I was in the restaurant industry for almost 20 years. So I've already paid my dues behind the kitchen and on the line and, holding the clipboard and freezing walk-in freezers and coolers. And what got me there was in 1999 reading a book from this chef that had just barely come out in the big scene. He had written a few articles for like the New Yorker and for the New York Times. Eventually wrote a book that was kind of like an expose of the culinary underbelly, became a huge overnight success at age 45 when most people are trying to figure out how to wind their careers down. He was taking off with his. And of course, I'm talking about Anthony Bourdain. The guy, if I could say that there is anyone that I would consider a hero to me, it's this guy because it was exactly the kind of hero that I wanted. I've always been a little rebellious. I've always been really kind of punk rock and not really following the traditional standards and rules of like what you're supposed to do with your career and what you're supposed to do in college. I'm just too much of a creative person. Hence, that's why I'm podcasting a lot. But, in my teenage years, in my childhood too, I was an actor. My mom had me auditioning for commercials and doing plays and taking acting and dancing and singing lessons all time. I did not have much of a childhood per se because I was doing all these things. And one of the things I really liked doing is my aunt owned a catering company. So I would help her with her catering stuff. I'd peel potatoes, I'd wash dishes, I'd serve champagne. Anything that they needed me to do, I'd do. And I really liked the idea of doing that. So when I gave up on the whole media thing, I started working in kitchens just on the line, cooking with the intent of going to culinary school. And during that time, like I said, this is 99, 2000, I read this book in hardcover, first time out, and it became my Bible. And it became a Bible for a lot of other people like me. And because of this book, I swear, this book and the explosion of the popularity of Food Network created, I'm going to say, like a 6, 7 year window where all of a sudden everyone wanted to go to culinary school. Everyone wanted to be a chef because it seemed so, I'm not gonna say glamorous, but it seemed so adventurous and punk rock. And a lot of that, I have to say, has to do with this book, Kitchen Confidential, that Anthony Bourdain wrote. I mean, this guy was a hippie and a dropout and a drug addict and a heroin peddler at one point, all this time working in the fanciest, nicest kitchens in New York City, getting fired from them, then working like at a hash house, and then going back to the high end of New York City, like this constant roller coaster. And so in this biography that he wrote, this expose, it just kind of tracked his chef journey. And I'm like, that is so punk rock. And he's a huge punk rock fan.
Right.
I've read all of his books. I've watched all of his shows. I've read all of his articles. I feel like if there's anyone that I at least think that I know on a personal level that I've never even met or ever had the opportunity to meet, it's him because I feel like I've read every word he's ever written and I feel like we got a real insight into who he was and his doubts and his questions of whether or not f- he was meant for fame because that was never his intention. All of a sudden he's writing and now he is on TV and now he is a personality. And I get that. I get that it could be exciting at first, but then living up to an expectation that sadly towards the end of his life, which ended way too early, it became a little overwhelming. Like he said many times that he was not meant for that life, but it got to a point where he didn't know how to do anything else but that life. So if I had the opportunity to sit and have dinner with the guy, it wouldn't be to ask questions of, you know, how you got started or what your favorite moments were because he's already written about it. We already know all about it. It's all in his books. I would just want to talk about the things that aren't in the books. I want to really know about the struggles. Like I want to know where he bought the heroin. I want to know
Yeah.
I want to know what bars were the best bars to listen to punk rock and drink to until like 5 in the morning. Not that I want to go do those things or relive those experiences, but I really want to know what's not in the books and what's not in the articles. Because he probably wrote a lot about it and editors take stuff like that out because like, no,
Yeah.
people want to know
Yeah.
about the restaurants and stuff.
For me, I think Anthony Bourdain is one of the ones. I'm not going to speak for everyone on this side of the pond, but wasn't one that we heard of massively, or it wasn't. I don't think it was too prominent, and I'm wondering if it's because, like you said, he kind of burst on the scene. Did you say mid-90s? So I think that was pre all the satellite channels and cable channels over here and the internet. So it wasn't one of these chefs that I knew too much about up until kind of the latter years, if you know, based on what kind of and following what happened to him subsequently.
And that was like kind of his whole point is he didn't want to be what he called the Food Network people. He didn't want to be a bobblehead with
Mm,
a cooking show, you know? Because he was a good chef, he was a good kitchen manager and kitchen leader, but he wasn't out there trying to create signature dishes for people to make at home. His whole thing
yeah,
was like, no, come out to the restaurant. Like, don't listen to these chuckleheads who are going to be showing you how to make budget versions of these fine meals that chefs like me spend their life and hours and hours and hours each week perfecting so you can come patron our business. He was actually really against that. You know, it's like, eat tuna sandwiches at home. Like, go out and have a good meal. Don't listen to these people who are trying to teach
yeah,
you how to make fine dining. Like, he was really, really big on that message, and I really appreciate that because I feel the same way too. So I think if we were to sit down, you know, we were talking about what are our three-course meals? Because I feel I know the guy so well from reading all of his books and watching his shows. I mean, yes, he had a very high, high, high appreciation for haute cuisine and fine dining. But his happiest moments on his show and in his books is when he was just eating casual fare in interesting places. So we'd start with just some really solid chicken wings, man, like some buffalo wings.
nice, nice, yeah,
Get our fingers dirty, get our lips red from chili sauce, and just kind of get to know each other. Talk about, hey, man, you know, you got into this world of working in kitchens because you saw these like pirate ship cooks in a small New England coastal town get high, get laid, get just all sorts of debauchery in their lives. And that looked fun to you because he came from a kind of stuffy upbringing and he wanted to be a rebellious person. I kind of feel the same way. Like we could bond over that. Like, yeah, man, it's like my mom wanted me to be an actor and she wanted to be a performer. And really, I kind of wanted to be behind the scenes and boss people around. And that's why I really jumped into the culinary industry so I could be a chef and have people say, yes, chef, no, chef, and not have to be
yeah,
the
yeah.
center of attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's cool, and I really like the idea of that starter. And just to go back to us meeting up, and again, I'm just going to say that Antonio is just the nicest person in the world as well.
Oh,
You took me to a couple of places you like, so we went to that seafood place, didn't we? Where it is just like you said, there's no pretentiousness. It is just good food dumped onto the table. Dig in with your hands.
you tear it apart with your hands. You have to wear a bib.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to wear a bib, and it's amazing. And then you took to that tiki bar as well, which is a really
Yeah,
nice little place. And again, it's just does what it says. It's a nice place to hang out and have drinks. And I think that, like I said, there are so many places that want to be the highest end, and we've got Salt Bay, etc. But more than ever now, just a real good home comfort food and drink, or a regular establishment where you can have a good time and they look after you is more important than ever, I think.
I agree. Especially if you are, in this case, meeting people you've never met. You don't want to feel like there is a pressure from the staff or pressure from people that are onlooking you in a nice place where you have to like watch your manners. You know, what if you're in the middle of a story and you just yell the word fuck and everyone turns their heads? You know, you want to be in an environment where you feel comfortable to be yourself. And that's
Yeah.
kind of where I was going with this.
Right, well, I'm going to go to my first one and my starter. Now, this guy is probably the complete opposite to everything you've just said. So I'm going to start with the food world, but I've gone for Gordon Ramsay.
I knew you were going to say
Now,
that.
yeah, now hear me out. So I get it. I get it. He's like one of these modern ones, and he's obviously the TV personality. I look at him and I think whether you like him or dislike him, he absolutely has made a success for himself. Now, I don't believe he was born into like riches, and ironically, he was trying to be a footballer. He was
Yeah, I knew
on the
that.
course to be a good footballer, but then got injuries, so then turned his mind to the culinary side of things. And I think it was already at the age of 19, he was already kind of working in kitchens and kind of rising up the ranks. And when he was 19 or 20, he ran a kitchen and a 60-seat dining room at a restaurant. And so he left there. Then 23, so again, young age, he moved to Paris to train in French cuisine for 3 years because I think he worked for Marco Pierre White in London.
He did
He said,
100%.
Go to France and do it." And then after that, he then worked on a private yacht, and I think he went to places like Bermuda and Italy where he learned then the Italian cuisine. I mean, he's had 17 Michelin stars throughout his career. He's currently holds 7. That makes him the 3rd in the top 10 chefs. And then, yeah, you've got the bit now which people may or may not like is his whole TV career. So he's got so many shows, and we spoke about a couple when we met up. Because I've recently started watching the Next Level Chef. So the questioning, when I said questioning earlier, for me, it would be more about, I want to know about those early years, like that year or two on the private yacht, where, who did he see? What kind of happened on these trips? Who did he cook for? I just like the fact that at a young age, again, 19, sort of 20, he's going around the world to kind of learn that skill. So I can't begrudge him the TV fame, if you know what I mean, because now he's kind of making the most of it. So yeah, I've gone for fellow Brit Gordon Ramsay as my first choice.
I like it a lot too. And, I defend Gordon Ramsay a lot because there are a lot of people that just know him from TV, not understanding that he had really like a 20 plus year career in some of the most high end workhorse kitchens in London and Paris. Like, that's not an easy job. Anyone that has eaten at a very nice fine dining restaurant where, it's like a 2-hour process and you have a bevy of courses and the bill is like $1,000, it looks so defined and so easy. But behind the scenes, it really is like an organized chaos. A good chef, a good kitchen manager will know that there needs to be a very precise level of organization and chaos. It's not all like that film The Menu that just came out where everything is like a perfectly orchestrated ballet. There is blood, there is sweat, there are tears.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a video of Marco Pierre White making Gordon Ramsay cry when he was like, 22 years old in the kitchen, and he's not ashamed of it. He's like, that's how you learn. You need people to kind of break your spirit and break your ego so you can build up one of your own. And those are the kind of stories that I would love to talk to him about for sure.
Yeah, and absolutely, and as you said, yeah, he is a top chef. So he's worked for Marco Pierre White. He's worked for Albert Roux. I think he's worked for Guy Savoy. And I don't necessarily like. So for many years, his programs were like the angry, angry persona. But some of his more recent ones is kind of where he's becoming almost like a mentor to people, and that's where you show his kind of like true self wanting to help people and progress people. And even across America, I mean, the chains of restaurants, I mean, you can't go sort of more than it feels like 100 yards in Vegas without stopping by a Ramsey restaurant.
Yeah, this is true.
So I just think it's really interesting. And I think, like I said, his early career, that purely the chef side of things, I think there's some fascinating stories in him there.
Now, would you want him to cook for you? Would you want to be in one of his places, or would you want him to take you to a place that he suggests so he doesn't have to worry about? Because this is where I would be if I was him and you guys were eating at one of his restaurants, and then something came to the table, he didn't like it. The conversation would stop, and he'd go back and yell at the kitchen. Like, that's the way I would see
No,
it.
I'd be providing the meal, and he'd be told at the start he's in my house, so there's no complaining.
I like it.
But I think I've chosen a nice menu, and I think he'll appreciate the main. But for let's do, yeah, one course per guest. So the starter, I'm going for a nice French onion soup,
Ooh, I like that.
flavoursome, something to dip the bread in. I like dipping, so I think, yeah, it's all about the flavours for me. Yeah.
With Gruyere melted on top of the bread, or just the bread? We do it two different ways out here.
So I'd have the cheese, yeah, on top of the soup. So I'd like the
Yeah.
crust of cheese on the top. Yeah, so you're breaking into it. Yeah, just I'm all about the flavors. I like anything that's been marinated or stewed or steeped for like 24, 48 hours. I like, I'm all about the deep flavors. So
I could be wrong. It could be another chef, but I'm pretty sure it's him where he said there are 3 basic dishes that anyone should be able to make. Anyone should be able to make a decent omelet, and then anyone should be able to make a decent French onion soup because it's so simple to make that it should be impossible to screw up. So he appreciates a good French onion soup, and then everyone should know how to cook a steak. Like he said that those 3 things would be like the fundamentals if I had to teach anyone how to do anything. Those 3 things you can feed a guest, feed a family, and you're worth and your value will be so much higher if you knew how to make just those 3 things.
There you go. So if that was him, he'd be happy with me so far.
I like it.
All right, who's your second guess? Who's next through your front door?
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna get a little stereotypical movie guy, but like me, I always have little caveats and explanations whys. My guess for dinner for sure would be Quentin Tarantino.
Nice.
But here's the thing, Quentin Tarantino is not my favorite filmmaker. He's not my favorite screenwriter, far from it, because he and I share, and a lot of people I feel probably feel the same way. Tarantino is a very good emulator of filmmakers, screenwriters, TV producers of the past, and all of their creative processes make him who he is. He will be the first to admit that he doesn't really feel like he has a very original eye or vision. And people say, "Oh, he's such an original filmmaker." He's like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "I literally copy, facsimile, steal from all the people who I loved, and I turn that into my style." I love that because A, there's a humility to it. Yeah, I'm sure he would have some kind of Hollywood ego because he's accomplished a lot. But a lot of people that I've talked to have met him or spent time with him in production world. He just loves making movies. He loves watching movies and making movies. A lot of fun. Yes, there's business. Yes, there's professionalism. But he has a podcast now, which is now one of my favorite podcasts. But even before the podcast, which is called the Video Archives Podcast, this is a guy that if someone's interviewing him about a movie, like his movie, he will literally like stop 2 questions in and just go off on a 5-minute rant about some random movie from his video store in the 80s and just go off on it. He's so passionate about other people's works that sometimes he feels like he doesn't even want to talk about his own. And that's why I think he'd be an excellent dinner guy because I've seen thousands of films, and thousands of films that I've seen came from his list of films that he loves. So it'd be like just walking into a video store, or in our case, a record store, like when we were in Vegas,
Yeah.
and just talking to the guy behind the counter about movies and inspirations and other filmmakers and weird French New Wave stuff that no one really watches anymore. So I would want to go and eat chili dogs in a hot dog stand in Los Angeles and just sit there and talk about all these films that I know he's seen or films that maybe he hasn't seen, which good luck on that, and how they've worked their way into whether it's a script he's written, a film he's made, or something that he hasn't even made yet but has been gestating. That's probably really what I want to know because he said in one of his audio commentaries before he was the age of 25 when he started selling screenplays, he had already written 30 movies. None of them were all the way finished
Yeah, yeah.
because he couldn't figure them out, but he had 30 stories. I want to know what those were and I want to know where they came from.
Yeah, I mean, it became fashionable a little while ago, didn't it, to kind of criticize him, for originality, etc. But yeah, like I said, I don't think he's ever called himself out as being that. And if you look at a lot of the directors, there's not necessarily a whole load of originality coming out, not in the mainstream. And I just think what I like about him is he just looks like someone who absolutely loves the history of film.
Hmm.
I can't criticize someone like that because he's just got a passion for his art. So, would you kind of talk to her about any of your favorite movies, or like your because you obviously you present the cult worthy? Is it would you go through anything that you've dug up or you've really liked in terms of your pod there?
Oh, 100%. I actually talked about this with the guys from the Derazzled podcast a few weeks ago, where it's becoming a thing where like all these movies that have been on my short list that no one's talked about, all of a sudden podcasts like his podcasts and the Pure Cinema podcasts. I don't know if it's just serendipity, but now they're talking about them too. So I actually have a small group of haters who think that I'm just copying those shows
Right.
by talking about these movies. And I'm like, no, I'm not. They are films that we're all nerds, right? Like we are like you're a comic book and music nerd. I'm a movie nerd. We fully admit that. And I think that there's a real naivety in some people where they think that they are such a deep nerd that no one else can appreciate the same stuff they appreciate. Oh man, we are a dime a dozen. We just
Yeah.
happen to be the ones that got a microphone instead of in front of our face and started talking about it. So,
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in one of my episodes recently was about, people that like to gatekeep. It's like, when you say, "Oh, I like this band." Oh, well, do you know what their debut album was called and what chart position it reached and what volume it sold? No, well, you ain't a fan. There's those kind of people, and it's like we can all appreciate the films. We don't have to be the first one.
Agreed.
Okay, so did you say chili dogs then?
Yeah, man. Like, probably at Pink's, which is a famous LA hot dog spot. He's featured it in some of his screenplays, so I know he's a guy, or he knows he's a fan, and he's a LA dude, so I know he likes to keep things LA based. So I feel like he'd be comfortable in that environment, and I'm pretty much comfortable anywhere. I think there'd be a lot less stress, and there'd be a lot less anxiety knowing that, okay, we're both like the chicken wings with Bourdain, we're gonna get messy, so we're gonna have to like lower our social expectations. And in that sense, you can have a more personal conversation because you've already broken down that wall of like, oh, do I got something on my lip? Do I got something on my shirt?
Well, do you know what? I've never had chili dogs. So if we ever meet up again, I need you to take me for a chili dog.
Oh, hell yeah.
Right. My second guess. Oh, okay, I'm going to switch the order of mine again. So mine, I'm going to keep is from the entertainment world. And this was when I was looking at the list of people I was having. This was a bit of a random one in terms of comparing them to the other two. I'm going for an actress, and I'm going for Zoe Saldana.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the reason being is, I mean, I think firstly, I really like her. She's currently in the top three highest grossing films of all time. It's currently Avatar, Avatar 2, I think, has just gone there, plus Avengers. She's been in some of the big franchises. So Avatar, the MCU, Star Trek. I believe she had a role in one of the Pirates of the Caribbeans. She is just one of these actresses who's had the fortune and obviously the work rate to be in these big grossing films. It would be great to speak to her about working with Cameron and working with the MCU directors. I just think she'd be someone fascinating to kind of talk about these experiences, having been in all these films.
Well, and also she started very, very young in other projects. The first time I saw her was in a film called Center Stage about ballerinas, I think in like the mid to late 90s before she kind of started doing the action stuff and the comic book stuff. And there is something interesting to me about performers that, she can absolutely lead a movie, but she seems to get more attention and better recognition when she's part of an ensemble. And to me,
Yeah,
I think I've talked about this on a podcast recently where I have more appreciation for like working actors and actors that can blend into the film and add to the film and not take the whole film for themselves. So, like when you go and see a Nicolas Cage movie, when you go see a Stallone movie, you're watching it because it is one of their movies. Sometimes when they try and take a smaller role or a side role, it doesn't work because they can't turn off
yeah.
that attraction, that magnetism that they are known for and fit into an ensemble. Where I think actors and performers like Zoe Saldana do that amazingly. Like, okay, you need me to be a Navi warrior? Great, I can do that. I can do this. I can be a dancer. I can be a rock star. I can be a hitman. I find that much more impressive than being the magnetic personality who takes the movie for themselves.
I couldn't actually put it any more perfect than that. And like I said, the fact that she is an actress like that and is in the biggest grossing films, whereas we've got some real big blockbuster actors and actresses out there.
Who bomb.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Like I said, I just think she's got quite a presence on screen. I'd have her in, so I think she'd get on with Gordon. I think they'd be all right together so far. I don't think I'd have any issues. And in terms of my main dish, and this is where Gordon would be happy, and I'm giving an option here because I think Zoe and my third guest are both vegetarian. So I'd be having a beef or salmon or mushroom Wellington with potatoes and vegetables, creamed potatoes and vegetables on the side. So beef Wellington isn't anything overly. I mean, a lot of places do it now, so it's just good standard fare. I think ultimately steak or fish or veg with potatoes and more veg. So
And a nice puff pastry surrounding it.
yeah, yeah. So that would be my second guest. Who's your third person walking through your door?
So this was actually like the hardest one for me because the first two were just kind of standing out there. And like I said, I struggled between a literary personality and a musician personality. And then when I decided on the literary personality, Okay, I'm like, okay, well, who do I talk to? Hemingway? Do I talk to
Yeah,
do I talk to Herbert Ashbury, who wrote all these great like true crime novels and essays back in the early 20s and 30s? Like, I had so many people, and because I am a movie guy, and because it does kind of blend into my conversation with Tarantino, I chose for my third celebrity, long since passed, sadly. Do you know who Pauline Kael is?
it's not a name I immediately.
So Pauline Kael is one of the uh, first real prominent and most controversial film critics of her day, especially being a female. She was known for not really as much writing critiques and reviews of films as much as she was writing very opinionated essays about films. Like, so her career was from like the early 60s till the mid 90s. She passed away in 2001, and she approached it from a very different way than a lot of her contemporaries did, where a lot of her male contemporaries and literary trained contemporaries, they, and I've had this conversation before on the podcast too, their bread and butter was to really make critique fun and biting to read. You know, people wanted to read their critiques for the zingers. They wanted to see them tear films apart and
Yeah,
really talk shit about the actors and the directors and the music. The same way that we like to enjoy watching Gordon Ramsay tear apart a guy on Hell's Kitchen, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Like, there is a lucrative there is a lucrative sense to being the heel when it comes to that. You can get more reads, more money, more cents per word on paper if you play that game. Pauline Kael did something a little bit different. She would write like these critical essays, not really telling you whether or not the movie was good or bad and go see it, as much as it was, what is the social commentary of this movie? What is the message that the filmmaker is trying to put out there, or the performers, or were these even the right performers? Or if this was my film, this is who I would cast in it. So she wrote for the New Yorker for 30, 40 years, and she had written for the New York Times and City Lights, all these different magazines. And her contemporaries really just didn't like her because A, she was kind of a rebel. She didn't follow the formula. She brought some like credibility and charm and pizzazz to her writing that maybe she didn't sell as many magazines or newspapers or words as other people did, but what she did do was gain a lot of respect from people in the industry that these 9 to 5 critics couldn't get, because they were so adamant about just tearing apart and being overly critical and overly spicy when they were giving their critiques and reviews, because these were the days before social media and Rotten Tomatoes. If you wanted to sell a movie, you had to have a great poster, you had to have a good trailer, and you had to get a good review in the newspaper. This is before any of those external factors that we have today that affect movies were. And what her writing did is her writing actually got people to care about a film that they hadn't even seen yet. So Tarantino loves her. A lot of filmmakers love her. Scorsese loves her. Even when they maybe were taken down in her critiques of their films, they were done almost as like, hey, this is what I would have done. I'm not a filmmaker, but this is where this film challenged me. And I feel I would have gotten a better experience out of it if you had maybe taken it this direction or used a different piece of music or different editing instead of like the Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert, thumbs up, thumbs down. You know, she put a lot of thought into it. Her books are great, her essays are great. So really, while we are having dessert, which in my case would be bananas Foster and a nice cup of coffee with her.
What's Bananas Foster?
Bananas Foster is a dish out here. I think it was originated at the Commander's Palace in New Orleans. It is bananas, often served with crepes, cooked in like a rum butter sauce, and then set en flambe, sometimes with a scoop of ice cream.
Very
Just a
nice.
really, really nice kind of like traditional palate cleansing dish. I'm a big fan of it. And just
I
kind
think
of,
you sorry, I think
yeah,
you've
score.
won I think you've won the dessert wars, but no spoiler yet. You've definitely won the dessert wars. So, do you think with her then, since the, the real popularity of like these reality shows where it feels like, yeah, you want to be, or people want to be that voyeuristic fly on the wall when people are being torn apart. There's that kind of attraction to that. And that's what I was saying with Gordon Ramsay's. I actually prefer more of his more modern shows where he's being more of a mentor and a nice guy, because you kind of want to see that encouragement. Do you think though, because you said she passed away quite a while ago,
Uh,
2001.
yes.
Do you think that maybe if she'd been around now, sort of post like internet phase, she'd have got a lot more following, a lot more fame? Would she have been more popular? Because it's kind of that just before, isn't it?
I don't think she wanted that. Like for her, it was more important to her to be respected by her peers and the people in the industry than it was to be a personality. I mean, she was writing and critiquing really right during the height of review shows of people like Leonard Maltin and Gene Shalit and Siskel and Ebert, and she didn't want any of that. Like she was a literary person. She wasn't looking for that according to everything I've read about her. She was a bohemian in her youth. She didn't consider herself a literary or a scholar as the people that were writing at the time and then getting these TV shows and becoming personalities.
Yeah.
Like she was enough of an outlier where she could gain the trust and respect of people in the industry and not feel like it was going to be exploited on a TV show. So I think she probably, in my opinion, was right where she wanted to be because she had access by not being too flamboyant about it. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. No, no, that's fair enough. And I think yeah, that fits right in with your other two guests as well.
Oh yeah, I love outliers,
Yeah.
man.
Okay, so my third and final, although ironically it was the first name I put down when I was doing this, is Paul McCartney.
Fascinating. Absolutely. I can see that.
I mean, again, I've said a number of times, I really do love my music, and yeah, I'm a huge Beatles fan. And so my first point here was, why wouldn't I invite him? He was in the Beatles. So so that's number one. But I've just got some stats here, and it's about the fact is he's released music over 70 years. His first single or album was in the 50s, and he's released every decade. So over 70 years, he has done 26 studio albums, 4 compilation albums, 9 live albums, 37 video albums, 2 EPs, 111 singles, 7 classical albums, 5 electronic albums, 17 box sets, and 79 music videos. He's had 22 number one British albums. He's written or co-wrote 129 songs that cracked the Billboard Hot 100, which 91 made the top 10. As of February this year, he sold a total of 90 million copies just from his solo albums. Because of all that, he's estimated to be the richest rock star of all time with a net worth of $1.3 billion. For me, and this is where I said right at the start, the whole thing about when I said about grilling someone is about this guy. I mean, 70 years in the music business, from the Beatles through to Wings, through to his solo career, everything he's seen, everything he's done, everyone he's met. I just think there's a whole treasure chest of stories that haven't even made the light of day from him. Some people may not like the Beatles, but again, I just think the longevity of the guy. I mean, last year he headlined Glastonbury last year, and by all accounts, it was a really good performance. I just couldn't imagine not wanting to be able to meet him.
There's very few people that I'd actually be afraid to meet because of the all-encompassing like shock value of actually meeting them because they feel so otherworldly and not even human at that point. And Paul McCartney's one of them. Like I wouldn't even know where to begin. So yeah.
And that's it, just because of that whole back catalogue of albums I've written, and the Beatles, when you do look at them deep down, they did burn brightly. They burnt hard and brightly. And I think it was last year, was it the Peter Jackson
Mhm.
remastering of the Get Back? I don't know if you've seen that. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, and the footage, it just looks like it's actually made this year. It looks like it was
Mhm.
made in the 2020s. You see the dynamics between them, because there was a lot of, yeah, there was a lot of friction. I guess you put 4 guys together and they have that much success that quickly. And also for me, the way the music transformed from the early catchy pop tunes through to the psychedelic and even sort of transcendental kind of music towards the end. I just think, yeah, I'd need to have him round for a week again, I think, not just one meal. I'd have to invite him round and lodge.
I think a lot of people forget or don't realize that his solo career has far encompassed the amount of time that the Beatles were together, even in their most creative stages. You know, if you think that they hit big in '64 here in the states, and then we're done by 1970. I mean, that's
Yeah.
barely 6 years, but the amount of development and evolution in their music style in that 6 years. You know, bands like Radiohead put out an album every like 3 or 4, sometimes longer years, and the Beatles had a full musical evolution in the spans of 2 Radiohead albums. That still blows my mind. And then for him to completely reinvent himself and create this other 5 decade long career on his own with Wings and himself and all the other projects he's been involved in. Yeah, it's very intimidating to me to even know where to start having that conversation with a guy like that.
Yeah. No, no, and again, you've hit it spot on. Yeah, the solo work is just, and I really do like his solo work. I mean, Flaming Pie is a great album. Egypt Station, and I think there's a song on it. Somebody described a song, I think it was on that album, as the greatest Coldplay song that Coldplay didn't write. Because, and it is, if you listen to it, it's just great, and you could imagine them doing it. So again, I almost think, even if you didn't like him or the Beatles, you have to like one of there will be a song of his or an album of his you'll like, because he's just done so much different, different kind of music. So he'd be number one on my list, but he's the third guest. And ironically, what I would do is, because he's there, I'd probably be playing the Rolling Stones on the stereo in the background. So,
I like it.
yeah, my dessert, I've gone really classical, and this is why I say you win hands down. I've gone for a fairly plain cheese board with biscuits, with grapes and apple on the side for, to cleanse the palate. But yeah, sort of a nice camembert brie, Stilton, some cheddar, yeah, with selection of biscuits. That again, because it's kind of what I like. So
That's funny because here in the States, that's considered an appetizer for the most part.
yeah, I know it is odd when you look at it, but yeah, we kind of tend to have it at the end as a nice little, 'cause often people don't want the big chocolate fudge cakes or chocolate brownies.
I have a question. Would you bring up the whole topic of him being dead and being an impersonator? Would you bring up that conspiracy theory or would you let it rest?
No, I'd love to ask him about it. Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah, yeah. There was an episode we've done on Internet Conspiracies where there is this theory that somebody brought back a Beatles
That
album from
tape.
a different dimension. So I'd
Yeah.
ask him about that. But yeah, the whole Paul McCartney died in like the 60s or 70s again is a fascinating conspiracy if
Mhm.
you go down that rabbit hole.
There's people that say they can prove it with, like, facial structure and all that stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, this world, anything's possible, isn't it? Anything's
Right.
possible. Okay, but I was gonna say, if I didn't have though the dessert, if it was for me, I'd probably upgrade it, or swap it out with maybe a nice. I do like either a creme brulee or a panna cotta, but I'm
Mhm.
going for the cheese boards. So okay, so just to recap, we've got Anthony Bourdain, Quentin
Mhm.
Tarantino, and was it Pauline Kael?
Pauline Kael would be my 3rd, yes.
And you're having wings, chili dogs, and bananas foster. I mean, that's a winning menu, I think. There. And I've got Gordon Ramsay, Paul McCartney, Zoe Saldana with French onion soup, beef or salmon or mushroom Wellington, and cheese board and cheeses. The question is, could our guests mix? Could we have a combined party?
I think the guests are so interesting that they'd all end up just talking to each other, and you and I'd be like, "Oh, well, I guess we're just gonna listen," because, they're such interesting people. It would be an amazing conversation amongst themselves because I don't even think most of them have even met each other. So
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because you've got Anthony Bourdain and Gordon Ramsay. You'd think, would they attract the talk? You've got Pauline Kael and Quentin Tarantino and Zoe Saldana. And
Mhm.
then you've got, Paul McCartney will probably be on the piano in the background playing the music.
Like, Paul, we're trying to talk. Turn it down. God.
Yeah. Before we wrap up then, was there anything you want to say about anything we've discussed today?
No, this is a fascinating topic. It's honestly something I've never thought about before. Like I have listened to conversations, I'm not necessarily saying podcasts, where like, hey, if you could dine with any dead celebrity, or if you could hang out for a day with any celebrity, who would it be? And I've never really thought about it. I actually had to really think about this one. That's why it was an exciting subject to be a part of.
That's why I'm really glad you came on for this one because I knew you'd come and you'd have people that you a lot of people just reel off three famous people or like, a famous footballer or something, but I knew you'd come with like well thought out things who mean something to you in your craft. So yeah, no, cheers for coming on for that. Have you got anything coming up you want to talk about, or do you want to just shout out anything about your pods before we go?
Well, I mean, I'll just throw out a few things. For the Cultworthy Cinema podcast, we're coming up on April, and it'll be Animation April. So it'll be a month long of animated films, some very happy and whimsical, some very traumatic and dark. We'll be having guests on from our pod network and just some other great cinematic podcasters jumping in on those. And then the MILF and me, we are starting to have a lot more guests on. We are going to be having guests on that are local strippers, local comedians, people that are relationship coaches. So if you listen to that show, expect a lot more guests in the next couple months. We're starting to get that lined up. So it's a lot of fun.
And if you want to get in touch with me here on Casting Views, you can get hold of me at castingviewspod@gmail.com or on Twitter, we're at Casting Views. And I like to always finish with I know there's a lot of podcasts from which you can choose. So thank you for listening to Casting Views.
2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, check what we've got, 'cause you need it. Don't make us get a spark and force